Hi, I'm Effie, and despite the fact the nominees finalists, I never know the right language to speak about it, of the Goodreads Choice Awards being announced today, this video is going to be me trying to guess what books make it into the fantasy category. Since the awards are live now, what I'll do is I'll start by giving a list of 30, because I couldn't narrow it down to 20 books that I thought might make it to the list, and then we will double check against what actually makes it to the list or made it to the list. And yeah, pretty self-explanatory video. So I think the first thing to do is run through my list of books that I thought would make it to the fantasy category. So these books are all in a kind of order, like they're not necessarily going from the book I thought most likely to make the list to least likely to make the list, but there's a sort of order, and I've also got reasons why I thought some of them wouldn't make the fantasy list. I am also realising that I didn't put the author name next to the titles, so I apologise in advance for that. Where I do know the author's name, I will say, but otherwise there should be a graphic on screen as I'm speaking, so you'll be able to see the cover and hopefully see the author title. A Sorceress Comes to Call by T. Kingfisher, Apprentice to the Villain, and this one I thought might be in romantasy. Reading through the blurb, it sounded more like a straight up fantasy than a romantasy. So I find romantasy a really hard category to pin down, because quite honestly, like, I feel like there's an undercurrent of misogyny in it. Like, I don't know, like, apparently I don't have the brain cells to discuss this right now, but essentially I think it's very hard to see where, or at least for me, it's very hard to see where the line between a book being fantasy with a splash of romance and romantasy is. I'm sure there are some, hard and fast rules, but I just couldn't quite pin it down. So the blurb for Apprentice to the Villain didn't seem to have any romance mentioned in it, but Assistant to the Villain was in the romantasy category last year, so I thought it was kind of a coin toss, pretty possible that it would be in romantasy this year. Blood Over Bright Haven, I think, is by M.L. Wang, the author of Sword of Kagan. Emily Wilde's Map of the Other Lands. This is another one I thought could be romantasy, however, the first book in the series was in the fantasy category last year, so I was like, okay, I don't really know. Empire of the Damned by J. Kristoff. Five Broken Blades. I cannot for the life of me remember who the author of that is. Somewhere Beyond the Sea by, oh my gosh, why can't I remember his name? T.J. Klune. House of Flame and Shadow by Sarah J. Maas. This one, I thought there's a pretty high likelihood that it would be in romantasy. I didn't mention earlier how I decided. I am so sorry. I've got like the tiniest bit of a cold and it is like scattering my brain cells. Basically, I did narrow out for things that I thought definitely were going to be romantasy, but the books that I kept on this list were ones where like there's a really strong fantasy plot, and if you take out the romance, the fantasy plot is still pretty strong. So I think there's a pretty high chance that House of Flame and Shadow is going to be on the romantasy list, but I do believe that the fantasy plot is such that it would have stood on its own without the romance. The Blackbird Oracle by Deborah Harkness, is that the author? The Book of Doors, I can practically see the author's name, but I could not remember it for the life of me, I apologise. The Bright Sword by Lev Grossman. The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. The Foxwife, this is another author I can practically see their name in my mind, but I can't conjure it to my tongue. The Lost Story by Meg Schaefer. I thought that the blurb sounded kind of lit fic, so maybe it's going to be in the, I think, general fictions where they put lit fic. The Tainted Cup by, Robert something. This one has a really strong like mystery thriller vibe from the blurb. It is a fantasy, but the mystery thriller element of it is strong enough that I thought maybe, just maybe, it might be in that category. Voyage of the Damned, another one I can't bring the author's name to my tongue right now. When Among Crows by Veronica Roth. A Song to Drown Rivers. Is that by Anne Liang? I can't honestly remember. And this was another one I thought could be in the romantasy category. An Education in Malice by S.T. Gibson. Lady Macbeth by Ava Reid. The Book That Broke the World by Mark Lawrence. And my reason to not include it was just ew, because I thought the first book in this series was downright paedophilic. So if I had my own way, this book would not be on the list. The Fury of the Gods, John Gwynne, I think. The Night Ends with Fire by KX Song. A Short Walk Through a Wide World by Douglas Westerbeek. An Academy for Liars by Alexis Henderson. I thought this one might be in horror. Evocation by S.T. Gibson. Mirrored Heavens by Rebecca Roanhorse. Mislaid in Parts Half Known by Shona Maguire. The Daughter's War by, I know his first name's Christopher and his second name begins with a B, but I'm not able to conjure the rest of his name up. That is the list. So let us open up Goodreads and let's see which of these actually made the fantasy category, and if ones that didn't make the fantasy category made it to another category. Okay, so we do have a romantasy category this year. I wasn't sure if we were going to, and I can see one of the ones that I'd already excluded, beforehand, actually made it to the fantasy category. But yeah, I didn't know if we'd have a romantasy category, but I was speaking to my best friend whose channel is Head in the Books, and she was basically saying it's such a big thing right now, they'd be missing a trick if they didn't. We have A Sorceress Comes to Call, The Familiar, The Night Ends with Fire, The Bright Sword, The Blackbird Oracle, and then A Sweet Sting of Soul was on my list, but I think it was quite far down. Let's see, what have we got? I'm just looking at like my original list, because obviously I gave you that list of 29 books. But I did have another list that was my master list that had, I think, over 200 books on. So let's see. So Sweet Sting of Soul was, if you were going just by shelving, A Sweet Sting of Soul was 24th on the list. It only just didn't make my narrowed down list, because I did, I think, 23. Because I narrowed out the ones that I thought were going to be... Words are hard for me right now, apparently. Yeah, I narrowed out I added in an additional 3 because each of the lists had like 3 that I thought would be in other categories. And then we also have The Warm Hands of Ghosts, which I feel like I excluded pretty early on, so I may not have a position for that one. But basically I excluded it because I thought it was going to be in historical fiction. Yeah, I excluded it really early on. Sorry, I have to like play around with my spreadsheet right now. If we're going by shelvings, and this might include things that actually appear on romantasy, it is number 9, so it does make sense that it's on the list. Like, the thing is, I thought there was a high chance it was going to be on the list, but I thought it was going to be in a different list, and that's why it isn't in my list of 29-30. 5 Broken Blades, yep. Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands, An Academy for Liars, The Tainted Cup, Empire of the Damned. We've got another row, right? Yeah. We've got another row. Oh, we've got 2 more rows. I'm pretty sure I excluded the Dead Cattail Assassin as well. Let's see. So the Foxwife. Let's go see where the Dead Cattail Assassin's featured. Oh, okay. That's an interesting one. So that one is very much an outlier. You know how usually you always have an outlier of like a book you've never heard of that makes it onto their list, and then you look at things and it makes sense. Now this was a book I had heard of, so I'm not surprised it's made it on the list, but at the same time I am, because going by shelvings, and possibly a week ago when I made this spreadsheet, it had a lot fewer shelvings and a lot more people have added it on now, so my numbers are off. But this was 43rd in the order of going by shelvings. And then by the other metrics that I checked, it was like 45th and 44th. So it is a bit of an outlier. Like, I'm not mad, because it was a book that I wanted to read this year. Not that I'm reading the fantasy list this year, because unfortunately I'm just focusing on my arcs. So I don't anticipate reading anything from this list this year, or any of the lists, but famous last words. But yeah, Dead Cattail Assassins, Somewhere Beyond the Sea, The Book of Doors, The Lost Story, When Among Crows, Voyage of the Damned, and A Song to Drown Rivers. I think that's everything. I will check other lists for the ones that are missing. I guess like predominantly I'm going to be checking the romantasy list, but I'll have a quick flick through of the other lists. I feel like Blood Over Brighthaven is the one that I'm most surprised by, but also let's actually go through and see. Okay, so Lady Macbeth, unless that's come up in another category, Lady Macbeth at the point that I made this list was 8th going by shelving, but it was 20th and 32nd going by other metrics that I look at. A Short Walk Through a Wide World was 15th going by shelving, but 37th and 26th going by other metrics. Blood Over Brighthaven, I think, is the upset for me, in that I feel like I'm seeing a lot of people talk about it. It was 16th going by shelving. It was 7th in one of the other metrics I track, and the other metric goes in halves. So actually, like, when I say something was like 26, Anyway, it has a score of 11.5. That's right. So one of them is actually an order and one of them's a score. So it's got a score of 11.5 in another category. So I am surprised that didn't make it. An Education in Malice, it was 17th going by shelving. It was 35th in another category that I track and had a score of 26 in the other category. I think those are like the big surprises for me, probably. But I think excluding the Dead Cattail Assassins, like the rest of them, I'm like, okay, it makes sense. Like, you know, and that's not to say that I think the Dead Cattail Assassins shouldn't make the list. Like, P. Jelly Clark is a really respected author. I haven't read the book, so I can't comment on the book, but I have only heard good things about his writing. It's just that by the metrics I track, it's kind of similar in some senses, but not a lot, to something like Venko, or I guess a better comparison would be the Salman Rushdie Victory City last year, in that it's a really well-known author, but it wasn't necessarily on people's radar. But I am, you know, I'm not mad at it being on there by any stretch of the imagination. Like, you know, I'd much rather we didn't have something like Empire of the Damned. But, you know, that's personal issues with the way that Christoph used imagery that wasn't his to use in the first book. Also, I found it boring, but you know, different people like different books. So let's go through the romantasy category and see if any of the ones that didn't make it to fantasy were actually in the romantasy category. I will say that I had excluded out a lot of romantasy that was clearly romantasy from this category, so it's very possible that ones that won my list for fantasy won't be in romantasy because they don't fall under the criteria or whatever. Does that make sense? I don't know if it does. Okay, so we've got Apprentice to the Villain and House of Flame and Shadow on this list, which, to be fair, like those were two of the ones where I was like, okay, yeah, it's probably gonna be in the romantasy category. And that's it. I think I had a lot of the romantasy categories on the romantasy books on my master list, and I excluded them out because I was like, yeah, this is gonna come under romantasy. Oh, interesting. I would have put Bride in so Bride obviously wasn't on my fantasy list. It was on my master list, but I think I thought it was going to be romantasy, so it's interesting that it's been put in romance rather than romantasy, because I guess it would fall under the category of like paranormal romance, although I don't feel like a lot of things get that classification nowadays. I feel like a lot of the time paranormal romance and romantasy blend together, but I am terrible for knowing what genre books are. So I guess I'm just surprised it's in that category. I'm trying not to get too carried away by the other categories, but I'm so happy to see Baby X in the science fiction category. Although, I mean, I don't read a lot of science fiction, but I feel like The Ministry of Time could be the one that wins that, because I feel like I'm hearing a lot from that, but you know, without looking at the stats and stuff, I couldn't possibly come up with a guess. Diavola is in horror, which I absolutely adored. I've also read My Darling Dreadful Thing. Interesting to see that, because I feel like no one's talking about that book. Oh, I didn't realise there was an audiobook category. I like that. Oh, Voyage of the Damned is also in debut. Fantastic. And The Book of Doors, which is interesting because I don't know why, but it feels like that wasn't the author's debut. Obviously it was, but it didn't feel that way. So what's in audiobook, just because that's a new category for this year? Have I read any of these audiobooks? That is the question, and the answer, I believe, is no. It's no. I mean, none of these audiobooks I'm looking at with any kind of excitement, but then I don't know, like, how do they even... Presumably there are stats on Goodreads for audiobooks, but how do they decide which ones are making it? And is it going by like Audible data rather than... Yeah, is it going by Audible data as opposed to like Goodreads data? I don't know. I am baffled, but it's not as if I'm looking at this and going, oh yeah, so exciting. Like, I've listened, whatever language you want to use, to some far superior audiobooks this year. Is anything in YA that I got confused with? Okay, so I've been through all of the categories now, and yeah, so Blood Over Brighthaven, I'm surprised, but I'm sure when you get into the stats it'll make sense, maybe. And Leading Macbeth as well, I'm mildly surprised I didn't make it. I don't know. There's always some upsets and stuff. Obviously, because it's decided based on, you know, shelvings and kind of popularity and stuff, you are going to have some really fantastic titles that don't make the list. Like, let me know if you'd like to see a list of books that, like, could have made the list if they were more popular. Does that make sense? I don't know if it does. Let me know if you'd like to see kind of an alternative list to books that didn't make the Goodreads Choice Awards this year, but I thought were absolutely fantastic and were a 2024 or late 2023 release. But that's all that I've got for you today. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you're having a good day. And until next time, love you. Bye.